Thanks a lot, Max. That was a really nice introduction, and I would like to thank you and the organizers and I think Seth, most importantly there, who invited me to give the keynote at this conference. And yeah, it's a really nice, it's actually the first time I think I was introduced as a plumber, but it's fine, I'll take it. I think that's a good thing. Plumbing is important, and I think using good plumbing and using quality plumbing can really help you to build up more valuable stuff. And that is what I want to talk about today. A little bit about that good plumbing is important, and the plumbing I'll talk about will be APIs. And as Max said, I've been working in this space for quite a while, and I always think that it's really interesting to think about what APIs really are, what they allow you to do, and that it's really important to kind of get them right. So to just give you a little bit of an introduction maybe into who I am and what I do. So my name is Erik Wilde. You can find me on Twitter. By the way, the slides are online. I posted the link to the slides in my Twitter timeline. So if you want to check out the slides online, go ahead and do that. They're interlinked, so you can just look at them in your browser and you can actually follow links, which is, I think, convenient. So you can just do stuff with the slides. So I have been working in industry for almost 10 years now. Before that, I worked in academia. I always worked on large-scale information systems, web technologies, web architecture, and now this was kind of a natural transition into the world of APIs. I have been doing a lot of public speaking. My role in the companies I've worked for the last companies, always was outreach and helping to get the word out, how to do the right things with APIs and how to do them in the right way. Because that is always, I work for Xway, which is a software vendor, and we sell API management software. And it's very important for us that our customers actually use them well, because otherwise they will not be happy. And it's very important to do the right things, because otherwise you might buy the software and the software in itself might be good, but if you're not using it in the right way and you're not doing the right things, then you won't be happy with it. So I've done a lot of public speaking, I've done a lot of traveling, which naturally these days doesn't happen anymore. So these days what I do actually, I produce a lot of videos. So if you're interested in API topics, go and check out my channel. I post pretty regularly. I try to tackle topics that people find interesting, and it's just an interesting exercise for me actually to move over a little bit into this new medium for me. The team I work with is a very small team within Xway. So there is just 7 of us. We're called the Catalysts, and our role really is to make sure that our customers basically do the right thing and do it in the right way. We never ever talk about products. We have enough other folks doing that. We want to tell people what, in our experience, are good ways to use APIs, what are successful ways to use APIs, and what are the important things to keep in mind when you use APIs so that you use them in the most effective way. The topic of this event is sustainable data services. I translated that, since I'm from the API space, into sustainable APIs. And I thought about, okay, what does that really mean? And it's, I think, not that different between companies, let's say, and public administrations or public services, because in the end, it's about the same general idea. An API is a way how you make some capability available. You allow somebody to do something, and when they think that's valuable, they will use the API, and that creates a value exchange. In companies, that often means you have paying customers. In public administration, it means you make the life of your citizens better. So in both cases, you're kind of doing the same thing. You transfer some kind of value between users and providers. When you look at APIs, I think a very easy way to think about APIs is they're a promise. They are a promise where you say, for now, if you want to get something done, here is how you can do it, and this is how it works. And that promise is something that goes down to a technical level. You have to define the API, you have to say what the data formats look like and so forth, but it also is something that has to be useful. It has to be valuable. So you have to think about, what should I even do? What do people want to do? And then you can start building your API around it. And once again, thinking about that topic of sustainable APIs, I thought if you look at this basic idea of APIs as a promise, we can look at two very simple things. And these are the only things I want to talk about today. So one thing is, when you make these promises, think about who you're promising something to and what that actually means, what value that promise creates. I think that is really important. We have a lot of organizations that just create APIs without thinking about why they're even doing it and who should be the ones consuming it. And I think that is one very important thing that you have to think about. The second thing that I want to talk about is thinking about not just producing APIs or publishing data or whatever it is that you're doing, but also thinking about how you can become part of a bigger picture, which is this idea of building a platform. And that is something that I think is really important and really interesting, so I will spend some time doing that. But first, let's have a brief look on what an API is. It's a promise, and what a good idea is to approach this general process of, let's do APIs, now what do we do? One thing that is really important for, I think, many organizations to keep in mind is that since an API is a promise, it also should be managed well, meaning that you make that promise, somebody takes you up on it, and then you have to keep the promise. That means you have to put resources into it, and it's important to be aware of that. Like everything else, APIs don't come for free. So you have to think about why you're doing them, how you're doing them, who you're doing them for, and also how you may stop doing them, because you realize that keeping that promise now costs more resources than it creates value. So that's important as well. And that's something that I think in a lot of cases organizations are not really quite taking as serious as they should. They just think that, well, if we have API, a lot of good things will happen. And that's kind of true, but it's only true if you manage the APIs in the right way. And in order to do that, what we do when we work with organizations who want to start on their API journey, publish APIs, and let's say transition towards APIs, we have a structured way of how we look at all the things that you have to consider. Because an API is a product, should be managed as a product, and you have to look at things such as strategy, design, documentation, development, testing, deployment, security, monitoring, discovery, change management. So all of these are considerations that you should have, and it's important to think about those, because if you're not doing that, then you may spend a lot of resources creating APIs without anybody consuming them, and then they're not really valuable at all. The only reason why an API is valuable is because it is used. That's really the number one thing that you have to keep in mind. And I want to give you two very short examples of how these different facets of what matters translates into more specific exercises that we go through when we help organizations managing their APIs. So one, for example, is API design. And when you look at API design, as I said, an API is a promise, and it's also a language, meaning that an API allows two parties to cooperate to get something done, and it defines how you do that by exchanging data very often. And there are different ways how you can do that. And I'm a firm believer that there is no single best way how to design APIs. So an API is a language, and then you can ask yourself, how do I now define and design that language? And there are different ways how you can do that. Here I'm showing you a brief outline of the languages, some of the languages that are out there. I have classified them into 5 different language styles. You might see some technologies that you know as examples of these styles. But what I find is really important is to always understand that for the general API space, there is no single best way how to do it. Depending on the product that you want to build, there may be different ways how to solve that problem in a good way. And that depends on the people you design for, the problem you're approaching, the landscape that you're designing into. So what are other APIs looking like? And all of these are important considerations. So it really is something that is important to keep in mind, that just doing APIs is really not good enough. You have to think through how you're doing it and what kind of design exercise is important for you. A second interesting observation in that product management space is versioning. I won't go into any details here, just a interesting little tweet from Roy Fielding. He's one of the creators of the HTTP protocol. He has been very much involved in that, so he's a really well-known figure in the web space. And what he's saying is really, when you design APIs, make sure that you keep in mind that you don't break other people's applications. And that is really important, because every API is a promise and you have to keep that promise. So one of the things that's really important is to always plan for evolution, meaning that from the very beginning, once you start doing something, think about, if I want to change this, how would I do this? And how would that affect people who already use this API? That's something that is not really, really hard, but it's something you have to plan. It's something you have to keep in mind from the very beginning. So it's an important thing to be aware of this. And like many other things, and as has been pointed out, in plumbing, it's the same thing. You have to be aware of what things you have to take into account, you have to put into the design, so that if something bad happens, if you have to fix something, if you have to change something, you can do that. If you have planned for this, it often is relatively easy to fix things or to change things. If you haven't planned for it, you may have all kinds of nasty side effects that you don't want to have. So keep that in mind. Always plan for evolution. That's an important thing for APIs. That was the one thing that I wanted to talk about, just a little bit about API products, that it's important to see them as products, to design them, to think about who you're designing for, and to have a focus on, I want to make my consumers as happy as I can. The second thing that I want to talk about very briefly is this idea of building platforms. And by platform here, I mean a very specific type of platform. And that specific type of platform is a business model. Traditionally, business works like this, linear business models. And that is true both for goods, for physical goods, and for services. So you take your starting point, which for physical goods may be raw materials, you maybe have suppliers that give you parts, you may consume some services, then you build stuff and you make it available to consumers. That's a linear value chain. The same is actually true for governments when you think about it. A government, if you look at the organization as a government, it starts with raw goods, with data. So let's say you take a data set, you collect the data set, maybe you have some other parts that go into it, and then you somehow make it available for consumption and people consume it. It's the same kind of linear value chain where you say, it's good that I publish data, and it is good. And this kind of linear value chain is something that has been around for millennia, and it works well. But what's interesting is to think about what also works very well nowadays, that people are more and more networked. And this is the platform model, the platform business model, to be more specific. The typical platform is something like eBay. So eBay doesn't really sell you stuff. eBay is just a place where you go to find somebody who sells stuff. And that is extremely valuable, because otherwise it would be hard to find them. What that means is that eBay as a platform is very valuable to people because it creates these means of connection. And as we know, all these very, very valuable platform companies like Facebook, Twitter, Google, eBay, Apple, they have figured out really good ways how to enable this value transfer between different populations, between different user groups, and build their business model on top of it. And I think that is something that is really interesting and that also helps a lot when you think about what you can do with APIs. Because when you look at these arrows, all these arrows are all APIs. They are all flows of information, and these are enabled by APIs. In a lot of cases, when we talk to organizations and we show them this platform model, the initial response always says, yeah, but we're not Google. We don't want to be Google. And that's fine. Very few organizations aspire to be Google, and that's okay. But what I think is really interesting, and in particular, I think in the case that we're looking at in today's event, is that while it is very valuable to publish data and to make it available, it also could be very valuable to think about what other kinds of value might people want to exchange, such as additional information, reviews, or whatever it is, additions to data. It's hard to think of these things on the spot, but I think it's really important to take that into consideration. So what you end up with then is this kind of hybrid model, which is on the one hand still looking at the traditional idea of we produce something, maybe as a government you produce things, but then you also start thinking about how can we also become a platform so that people can base value exchanges on our platform, and there's a combination of what we do and what people contribute. So that is something where you could say this is citizen contributions. And how can we build something where the data that we have plus the contributions by citizens overall produce more value for the consumers? And that, I think, in particular in the public space, could be something really interesting to think about. And APIs play a big role there because they are the bits and pieces, they are the plumbing that move all this information around. And if you get that right, magical things can happen. And I think that is really something that is a very interesting thing to think about and a potentially very valuable thing to explore. And with that, I'm already done. What I wanted to talk about was this, what we call the API journey. So this idea of really thinking about what I want to get done with APIs, why I'm even doing it, what scenarios I think I can contribute value to, and who I'm contributing that value to. I wanted to point out that it's important to manage your APIs as products, to think about how you can change them so that you can improve them while you're learning what you're doing, and to make sure that you always have a structure in place that makes sure that these products are really owned by somebody and managed by somebody. And I also wanted to briefly talk about this idea of a platform and how that might completely change, so to speak, what you want to do with APIs, where it's not just publishing data, but you really think about how can we actually provide more value, and that's not necessarily value we have to produce. We just have to connect the right places, and then suddenly we can generate much more value than we could before. And with this, I'm done. Thank you very much. Once again, the slides are online. If you want to look at them, they're interlinked. You can find them at the URI that's shown here. And if you have any questions, I'll hang out in all the digital places after this presentation. And also, please feel free to contact me in the usual digital places. You'll find all my contact information here. Thank you very much.